As you can see, we're moving on to essential equipment. So don't worry, you don't need to write all these right down. We can give you the slides afterwards if you want. And I'm going to go through each item in a bit more detail, but that's kind of a brief list there. If you want, you can take a photograph of that with your phone maybe, or take a screenshot. So we'll go through each item of equipment in a little bit more detail now. So this slide is very important. Reason being that when you buy your Sit On Top kayak, while it's past all the kind of minimum safety standards, it doesn't come with certain items. So high-vis reflective tape is something that I'm really passionate about advising people to put on not just their kayak, but also their paddles. And the reason for that is, particularly if you're out during the autumn, winter, or springtime where the days are shorter, if you had an emergency late in the day, you could end up being caught out in the darkness. And if we come to look for you in the lifeboat or a helicopter, whatever it might be, if you've got this high-vis tape on your boat, paddle, and indeed your buoyancy aid, it's going to make it a lot easier to find you. There'll be a lot less faffing around. So you can see there in the photograph on the left, the difference between a kayak that does and does not have the tape on it. So I would also advise maybe writing your name on it as well, putting a phone number on it using a permanent marker. And the RNLI have a safety pack that you can get from your local station that has a kind of a boat ID sticker on it. So make contact with your local RNLI or drop me an email afterwards and we'll get you set up with one of those. Now, the next thing is we're going to move on to your paddles and your paddle setup. So I know we have the mics off there at the moment, but I just ask you to look at the photographs at the top there, left and right. Do we notice anything wrong with the participant on the right? Okay, he's got his paddle leashed on, but he's missing one vital piece of equipment, his buoyancy aid and his life jacket. And that's something that we want to place a lot of emphasis on this evening, is that we are wearing the proper equipment. So back to the paddles. I really would be a strong advocate of putting your paddle leashed to the kayak. And the reason that we do that is, well, there's a number of them. If you end up in breezy conditions and you fall off your kayak, you would be amazed at how quickly you could get separated from your equipment. If your kayak starts to blow away and it has a paddle trailing from it on a leash, it will slow down that rate of travel from you. Also, if we end up in the water and we're too tired to climb back on our Sit On Top, we can then use our paddle to raise the alarm, to wave for help. And we'll be talking about that a bit more later on. And then finally there, just you can see a photograph of a paddle with some high-vis reflective tape on it as well. And at nighttime, you'd be amazed at how effective that is, even just for looking out for our friends on the water. But in an emergency situation, as I said, it's a vital piece of kit. Okay, now we're going to move on to probably the most important piece of the equipment. I've just given you a number of examples there. I don't have any allegiances to any particular brand here this evening, but some people might be new to the term PFD, which is the correct term for a buoyancy aid, a personal flotation device, or an LJ is your life jacket. So for anybody with good water confidence or who has built up some paddling experience and is a good swimmer, a buoyancy aid will do just fine for Sit On Top kayaking. You can see on the left-hand side there, there's a fairly minimal buoyancy aid. While it might fit well, what it doesn't have is reflective or high-vis piping on it. So the middle buoyancy aid and the one on the right there from Pam, you can see they've got, you know, a more sort of ergonomic cut to allow more comfortable paddling. They've got pockets for us to store accessories and snacks and all sorts of things. But most importantly, there's lots of high-vis reflective tape on them. So when you're buying your buoyancy aid, you know, don't just buy it off the internet on a whim. Make sure you talk to people, go see your local retailer or outdoor shop and try it on and make sure that it fits with you. And bear in mind, when you're trying it on in the shop, you might be just wearing your t-shirt or a sweater. You've got to envisage what are you going to be wearing underneath that, like your wetsuit or your dry suit and so on. One point that I'd like to emphasize as well in relation to children, because it's their most common entry point to the sport of kayaking through sit-on tops, is that a life jacket for them is essential. And I'm sure we've probably all heard of some recent tragedies which have been, you know, so tragic. And the life jacket is essential for children. And I'd also advise that that should have a crotch strap on it as well, because if the jacket isn't fitted properly, if it comes up over their head, they can end up falling out of a buoyancy aid or a life jacket very quickly. So do consider that when you're buying. 2 additional pieces of equipment with the buoyancy aid: having a whistle to hand, preferably tied to a piece of string. Really important. So my whistle of choice, if you want to be nerdy about it, is the Fox 40. It works brilliantly in water, and it would deafen you with the sound of it if you're close by. So have a look out for that at your local outdoor shop. Now, I am going to be recommending carrying a tow line. So anytime that we use a rope device when we're kayaking, either a tow line or a throw bag, we always carry a knife on our person as well. Now, obviously, there is skill and user familiarity required with that. But just say, for argument's sake, if we were out on a rescue and things got a bit out of hand, if you have a tow line wrapped around you or something else, you may need to get out of there very quickly. So that's why we carry a knife. It doesn't need to be a machete. You can get a nice, discreet kayaking knife that will fit easily in one of your pockets. Okay, so just grab a quick sup of water here, folks. So just a few photographs here now for us to think about proper clothing for on the water. So it's, you know, the most common thing for people is to buy a wetsuit, and you know, it's very affordable and does a good job of keeping them well and warm on the water. So the chap we can see there on the left hand side, he's wearing what we call a kind of a surf style steamer wetsuit. You can get them in summer or winter configurations. So it's all about what time of year are you going to be out on the water. So for example, here in Ireland, you know, when we get into July and August, if you're wearing a 5'3" winter surf suit that might be fleece lined, pretty soon you're going to find yourself too warm in the water. So you might get away with a shorty or a 3'2" suit at that time of year. But on the opposite side of that, in the depths of winter, if you ended up falling off your sit on top wearing a shorty in November right through till May, I'd say, you're going to find yourself really compromised very quickly. Our middle configuration here is quite a common one amongst kayakers. So the long john wetsuit, they typically about 3 mil. It's sleeveless. We'd wear a thermal or a rash vest underneath it to keep our core warm, but it gives us great flexibility. And then on top of that, we'd wear a cag jacket or a cagoule as it's called. And these can come with hoods as well, which are particularly helpful if it rains, or when it rains in Ireland, I should say. And we can also buy this with reflective tape on them as well. I know that we've got some sit on top anglers joining us this evening as well. It's a very big part of the sport, and one that Ireland is very well resourced with. And the dry suit is also an option for people who know that they're going to be paddling quite a lot. So the benefits of a dry suit are it's very comfortable to wear. You don't have that sensation of being wet all the time because you have nice dry thermals on underneath. And if you're going to be out for a long time, maybe you might need to go for a pee stop or a pee break along the way. So you can buy suits with convenience zips, both male and female. But clearly, as you get into equipment like that, it does get more expensive. So you do need to think about your budget and how that works for you and how much you're going to be out and what time of year. Now, to complement all of that clothing here, we got a good photograph of somebody well kitted up. I'd have some criticisms of that photograph as well, in that a lot of his equipment is black, and that doesn't work very well, particularly in wintertime. So think about the coloration of your gear. So we'll look at some booties there, or footwear for kayaking, and those 2 boots on the left-hand side there, they're quite hard sole booties. They're not like surf booties, you know, which tend to have very thin soles. So your footwear needs to have good soles on them, because you could be trekking around a rocky shoreline or slipways, and it just makes it safer for you to move around. The gloves that are there in the middle are the same pair that I use myself. They're made by NRS, and it's quite hard to get a neoprene glove that works well for sit on top kayaking, but NRS's range of kayaking gloves are particularly good. I know Pam makes some really nice ones as well. They're thin and do a great job of keeping your hands warm at the colder months of the year. On the right-hand side then, we've got a skull cap and a kind of a neoprene beanie. So they are fantastic during the winter time. Many of us that take our kayaking seriously will also wear a helmet. That can be a debatable topic for people who are new to Sit On Top Kayaking. Certainly, I would say to you, if you have children and there's a lot of hijinks, a helmet is definitely worth considering there. So just to think about the extremities, because that's where we lose a lot of our heat. If we end up falling into the water, you're going to lose most of your heat through your feet, your hands, and in particular your head. So next piece of equipment we're going to talk about now are tow lines or tow devices. So for Sit On Top Kayaking, generally speaking, we hope you're not paddling too far in them, and they tend to be, you know, just for tootling along and enjoying the coastline. But if you do have somebody in your group or your family that gets tired or becomes unwell, you may need to tow them back to shore. And again, this is where some proper training would be advised, because there are some complexities around using a tow line. You're effectively connecting yourself to someone else and their craft. So again, just to repeat, having a knife on your buoyancy aid. These are both belt-mounted tow lines, and they will have quick release buckles. You need to familiarize yourself. Do they open left or do they open right? You need to ensure that you pack the tow line properly so it doesn't foul up the next time you go to use it when you might really need it. But for Sit On Top Kayaking, I'd recommend a shorter tow line. So somewhere between 3 to 5 meters will be plenty. The bag on the left-hand side is more of a sea kayak one. And when we tend to go out in open sea conditions with, you know, following conditions like swell and waves and wind, we might need to space ourselves out a bit wider. So a tow line won't cost you too much. But again, I'd just like to emphasize, please get some proper training in its usage.